يجب غض الطرف عن كل مباح يجر رأيه إلى ما لا يباح. Furthermore, one is obliged to lower the gaze from every permitted thing, whereby its sight could lead to that which is impermissible.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Alhamdulillah. So غض الطرف is obviously from the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands the believing men and believing women to lower the gaze. And so the tarf in Arabic is one of the words for gaze. So he's saying it's an obligation, it's wajib, to lower the gaze. عن كل مباح يجر رأيه إلى ما لا يباح. So looking at something that in normal circumstances would be mubah, but because it leads to something, and this is called in usul, you have something called sadda dhari'a. Dhari'a is a means to something. So it's like cutting off the pretext, the means to something that is haram. So if something in and of itself is not haram, but it's the means to something haram, then sometimes the scholars will tend to argue on that you should prevent that pretext. So for instance, they traditionally, and this is certainly the hukm that you'll find in all of the books of fiqh, that it's not permissible to look at the face of an ajnabiyya. Ajnabiyya, and basically there's three things that create mahramiyya. The mahram is a person who you cannot legally marry. And they have a different hukum or ruling, legal ruling, than a person that you can. So for instance, if a woman is married, you can't legally marry her, but she's still not a mahram because she could get divorced, she could lose her husband, and in that situation you could marry her. So a mahram has a permanent prohibition of marriage. It's not simply at any given time. So for instance, if your brother is married to a woman, and then that's part of the family, but nonetheless, you could potentially marry that woman because it doesn't prohibit a brother from marrying the wife of his brother if she died, something like that. Whereas the father, it's not the case. It's prohibited for the father. Once the marriage contract takes place, then it's mu'abbad. So the father can never marry that woman, and so she becomes mahram for that. And in that case, she can take off her scarf, and she has a different set of rulings, which he's going to get into. So what he's talking about is the ajnabiyya. This is the woman who is not mahram. And again, the sight, even though the Quran speaks to both the men and the women about that, يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ, telling the women also to lower their gaze, the sight and this is by social sciences, it's very, very strong evidence in support of the fact that men are more aroused by form and physical stimulation than women are. But that does not mean that women aren't attracted physically also. I mean, it's certainly not the case. But the prohibition here is to look at something that is going to lead to some harm. And that's where the scholars have said it's not permissible to look at somebody if there's a fear of fitna. The khilaf about the face it's a well-known khilaf. The majority of scholars do not consider the face to be awra or the hands of a woman. But there are many, many scholars, and if you probably took a consensus, you'd find, I don't know, I don't want to say that, but there are many, many scholars that argued that when times get corrupt, then women should cover their faces. And this is why you got veiling became so prevalent in many, many Muslim countries. But veiling is not, it was not the practice of that early community. The Hajj, the woman is not permitted to wear a veil during the Hajj, going around Kaaba, or to wear gloves. And these were actually things that come in when you have, there was a urf, undeniably, and there were certain Arabs that used the burqa as well, which was in the Jahili poetry. But women tended to have a khimar, which is a head covering. And this is why people that say, oh, there's no headscarf in the Quran, they don't know Arabic, because the khumar in the Quran that's mentioned are the head coverings. And they were told to take their head coverings, which was Jahili urf, and to cover the bosom, the jiyub. The jayb is a cut, like your jayb in your pocket is a cut. So the jayb is the neckline of the woman's clothes. So the women were told to take the khumar, the khimar, and then to cover with it the bosom, because the Jahili women would cover their heads, but they would leave their cleavage open. And so Allah told them, no, cover the head and the cleavage, which is why a lot of the traditional way of wearing the headscarf was to use the khimar and to cover the front with it as well. And you'll still see that. But that's not, they don't have to do that. They can use other material to do that. That's the Quranic injunction was because that's the material that they had. So as long as they're covered, whether they do it with the khimar or with the whatever clothes they're wearing. So, and then you have the chadur, which is probably closer to what the early women wore. They had an outer garment that they would wear, and they could hold it with their, so they didn't have a face veil, but they could cover their faces when they wanted to, and they certainly did that. And there's plenty of evidence. But the hadith of at the Hajj, when the Prophet ﷺ was giving the farewell khutbah, is very clear, because he took the face of Al-Abbas' son, and he moved it away because he was staring at a woman, and he turned his face away from her. So he didn't tell the woman to cover her face. He told the man to lower his gaze. And so what he's saying is it's not permissible when there's a fitna, and also if looking for any long period of time will lead to a fitna. And again, when they say fitna, they're talking about ladha. And then he talks about, whether it's not, is it an obligation for her to cover her face or not? This is a big khilaf in the tradition, and you get opinions. If you go to certain places, it's just an assumption that they have to cover their face. So if you go to certain places in the eastern province of Arabia, it's very, very strong there. The urf is very strong for a woman to cover her face. Obviously, in Saudi Arabia today, that is the dominant position, and the ulama rigorously adhere to that, which is why you will find people get upset if people don't cover their face. It's become a lot more lax since I've become a Muslim, and because I've been going to Arabia since the early 80s, and it's changed drastically. It's a completely different culture, especially in the Hijaz. So globalization is having its effect. I personally think that the veil will probably die out almost, and it will be taken not as a cultural, like in Arabia, it's part of the culture. So it'll become a religious adaptation. People adopt it, women will adopt it for religious reasons, not for cultural reasons. And so I don't think it's going to go away permanently. I think there will always be people. The arguments for it are compelling. Both sides are strong, but it's not like you can't say it's a weak position, or no, it's there. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya is of the opinion And I certainly concur with him about that. That in the West, the veiling is very problematic because it's so alien to the urf of Western society. And veiling tends to actually be a very negative thing. Like it's associated with bandits and criminals. But women did used to wear face veils, and widows wore veils in the West. So they did cover, they had veils. And I actually have a picture of my great-grandmother with a full face veil on for Easter services. And that was in the 1920s. I actually wanted to write an article. My grandmother wore a face veil, and she was Irish Catholic. Because people did used to wear face veils. And this idea of banning them is very weird. Because what do you do on ski slopes? Do you give them tickets? Because they give tickets to women if they have a veil in France now. So if they're up skiing on the Alps, they can't cover their face or something. It's a very weird thing, taking away people's right to express a religious sentiment. So anyway, what he says is, is it an obligation? And he talks about these different opinions and then says, that she must do it if she's really, really beautiful. And if she's less than that, then it's still a good thing to do. So that's his position. In Mauritania, the women actually don't wear face veils, but they do sometimes. They wear their milhafa in a way where they can cover their faces. So they don't have the tradition of a niqab, what's called a niqab. But in most Muslim countries, niqab was very common. It's just a fact. But again, the Sharia is the dominant position in the madhabs of the great scholars of the madhabs was that the face was not a veil. And Shaykh Abdullah bin Bay actually in the Sina'at al-Fatwa says that it was the dominant opinion of all four madhabs that it was not considered an obligation to cover it. So, as an ideal Islamic state, should a government impose hijab? Well, two things that I have problem with. First of all, ideal. I don't think the ideal Islamic polity was during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and there's no indication that he imposed hijab. I mean, women, that was the urf of the society to wear it, and what the Quran told them to do was to cover themselves, and they did it. So their iman that was the level of their iman. But I think any type of coercion, la ikraha fid din, any type of coercion leads to hypocrisy. You just turn people into hypocrites, and they don't believe what they're doing. And obviously, every society has standards. So America has a hijab, England has a hijab, and they impose it by law. You cannot walk naked in the West. It's illegal. You'll be arrested. So that is an imposition of a hijab law. But who determines what the boundaries or the hudud of that are, right? I mean, this is the debate. So in Islam, a free woman's awra is defined, whereas in the West, the awra is defined by the social standards. 100 years ago in the West, a woman could have been arrested for wearing a miniskirt, right? Because it would have been considered public lewdness, and she would have been arrested. Well, that's not the case anymore. So standards, those social standards change. The Sharia doesn't change. These are thawabit in Sharia. So people can't come now, 1400 years later, and tell us, oh, for 1400 years the Muslims got it all wrong. Now, in this great enlightened age of Islamic illumination, we've realized what the Quran really meant. That argument is patently absurd because, one, the Sahaba understood the Arabic, and the Prophet ﷺ was there to show them. And we have the hadith, and people say, oh, they want to condemn the hadith, and say, well, I don't believe in the hadith. There are mutawatir hadith that you cannot condemn. If you condemn them, it's the same, because we have an epistemology, just like the West has an epistemological approach to things. Muslims have an epistemological approach to things. So we have mutawatir, that's part of our epistemology. We have ahad, that's part of our epistemology. We have akhbar, we have dhanniyat, we have hadsiyat, we have wahmiyat. These are all part of the epistemological approach of Muslims. A mutawatir khabar is 100% epistemologically sound. It's factual. So if the Prophet ﷺ said something and it's mutawatir, and you deny it, it's denying the Quran. It's the same, because the Quran is mutawatir. And so there's these people who say, oh, I only accept the Quran, the Quraniyun. They've already rejected the Quran. وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ. Right? Whatever the Prophet ﷺ tells you to do, وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. And what he tells you not to do, avoid it. Where does he do that? The Prophet ﷺ wasn't telling us in the Quran. He was saying the Quran was from Allah. He's just delivering it. That refers to his sunnah. And he said, don't, لَا أُلْفِيَنْ أَحَدُكُمْ مُتَّكِيًا عَلَىٰ أَرِيكَتِهِ. Let me not find one of you reclining on a comfortable couch and saying, مَاذَا وَجَدْتُمْ فِي هَذَا الْكِتَابِ فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. Whatever you find in this book, follow it. And if you don't find it in this book, just leave it. And he said, they won't mention my sunnah. And he said, Wallahi utitu al-Qur'ana wa mithlu. I was given the Qur'an and its like, which is the sunnah. So to deny the sunnah is to deny half of Islam. Because it's La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. It's God and it's the messenger of God. The Quran is the word of God. It's not the word of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the hadith is the word of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Allah. But it's the Prophet ﷺ telling us, and we have to follow the Prophet ﷺ. So to deny the hadith is kufr. If you deny the whole body of hadith, you're kafir. You're not Muslim. You're outside of Islam. To deny a hadith in al-Bukhari is not kufr. If somebody says, I can't believe in that hadith, that's not kufr. It's not something I would risk. You should at least say, I don't think he said it, but if he said it, I believe it. It's a more intelligent approach, agnostic, about the hadith, not about Allah. Right? So, and an ideal Islamic state is an ideal Islamic state of mind. And that's where you won't need to impose the niqab if you have the hijab, if you have an ideal state of mind in the Muslim woman. You won't need to impose it.